Second reading continues in Genesis. We'll start in chapter 42, verses 1 to 7a, chapter 45, verses 1 through 9, then chapter 50, verses 15 through 21. Listen again to the word of God. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you keep looking at one another? I have heard," he said, "that there is grain in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he feared that harm might come to him. Thus the sons of Israel were among the other people who came to buy grain, for the famine had reached the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was governor over the land. It was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke harshly to them. Now to chapter 45. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Send everyone away from me." So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his fathers could not answer him, so dismayed were they at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come closer to me." And they came closer. He said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are 5 more years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his house and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay.'" And now chapter 50, verse 15. Realizing that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers said, "What if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong that we did to him?" So they approached Joseph, saying, "Your father gave this instruction before he died. Say to Joseph, 'I beg you, forgive the crime of your brothers and the wrong they did in harming you. Now, therefore, please forgive the crime of the servants of the God of your father.' Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also wept, fell down before him, and said, 'We are here as your slaves.' But Joseph said to them, 'Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good, in order to preserve a numerous people as he is doing today. So have no fear. I myself will provide for you and your little ones.' In this way he reassured them, speaking kindly to them." Friends, this is the word of the Lord. All right, so family dynamics. Every family has them, and no two are the same. This is especially true when siblings get involved. I only have one brother. His name is Stephen. He's almost 10 years older than I am. So we never had a real contentious or competitive relationship like others that are closer in age, like the ones that we see forming with our boys right now. Brothers and sisters close in age can form incredible lifelong bonds formed through their rivalries growing up. And that rivalry can get ugly at times, maybe even bloody. Well, I only remember one physical fight with my brother Stephen. He was already in college at Texas Tech, and he played polo there. Well, one weekend or break, he came home, and he needed to go get one of his knees drained from riding. some fluid had built up. And like I said, I was probably 4th or 5th grade. I went to the doctor with he and my mom, and I watched the needle go in, draw the fluid out, but I had no idea really how painful that must have been. Obviously because of what happened that evening. Well, we were all sitting around in one of the kind of living room on couches, watching TV, whatever. And I don't know if you remember this fashion line from the 80s, but they were called jams. Jams. Jams, they were really bright, colorful, kind of floral, asymmetric. I mean, just crazy designs, obnoxious, perfect for a little kid. And I had a pair of Jams shoes, and I had them on, and my brother, he goes, "Hey, you know, you really have some guppy feet." I said, "What?" He said, "You really have some guppy feet." So, with my guppy foot and my jam on it, I went over and I kicked him in his knee that he had drained that day. Not cool. Yeah, Rich is guarding his knee as we speak right now. See, not only did I have no idea what he was saying or what that word meant, I was greatly offended. And what I came to find out pretty soon afterwards was guppy, which I still have never heard this, was another way of just saying big. Well, it's true. I wasn't 6'4" yet, but I had the feet to grow into. So I'm not saying that because I'm really proud of that moment. But I can say I'm undefeated in fights against my brother. So maybe I'm a little more competitive than we thought. But at least I can look at Joseph and say, well, you know what? At least I never plotted to kill my brother and instead sold him into a world of human trafficking and slavery. Okay? I mean, the bar's pretty low there. Yeah, the story of Joseph has become well known, especially through the production, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. He was the 11th of 12 sons fathered by Jacob, but he was Jacob's first son with Rachel, so even more family dynamics going on there than usual. And then Jacob had the great idea of making it known that Joseph was his most loved. Okay, I mean, parents, you might love one child more than the other, but you don't say it. And then Jacob goes and he adorns him with this coat with long sleeves, maybe like this, which is no good for going out and working in the field like the rest of his brothers, so he got to kick back all the time. And then the spoiled brat has these dreams that he sensed must have come from God, and naively, hey everybody, listen to this. And he tells them these dreams, and that did not help things, right? Jealousy, envy, and downright hatred drove his brothers to nearly kill him. Yet somehow, God was about to preserve his chosen people through the circumstances and gifts of this punk little kid, Joseph. See, the real threat to the covenant God made with Abraham that we looked at last week was an extremely severe famine that was coming, and it had the potential to wipe out his chosen people. If that happened, then God would have broken his word, and we know that he did not and will not do that. And so this is the upper story that's going on, God saving his people. And so in ways that can only be summed up with the popular phrase, the Lord works in mysterious ways, Joseph is about to embark on a physical, emotional, and spiritual lower story roller coaster. After the enormous betrayal by his brothers and the deception of their father, Joseph was sold to Potiphar, who was the captain of the guard for the Pharaoh. And while Joseph may have been tempted in that moment to feel abandoned by God, we read this incredible statement. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. Soon Joseph was in charge of Potiphar's entire house. And Randy Frazee likens it to the president's chief of staff putting a janitor in charge of the West Wing, which, hey, could happen. I don't know. Once again, life is really good for Joseph, just like the days when he was being spoiled by his father. Everything was going his way until ... Have you ever been in a situation where you were tempted to do something you knew was wrong, and you also knew you would never get caught? It says Joseph was handsome and good looking, and Potiphar's wife apparently noticed this as well. On a number of occasions, she ordered her slave to come into her room and sleep with her. And after all Joseph has been through, his life turned upside down, here's just one little tryst that he can enjoy and no one would ever know about it. On top of that, for a slave to refuse an order was inviting severe punishment. But none of that mattered. Joseph had chosen to side with God no matter the consequences, and there would be consequences. All it took was one rape accusation by Potiphar's wife. And I'm not drawing a direct correlation or analogy from this story to the chaos surrounding Judge Kavanaugh's confirmation process, but you cannot help but kind of be reminded of some of this. And I promise that months ago, we did not choose this story to line up with events we had no idea about months later, okay? But with no hearings, no testimony, no investigations, Joseph is once again thrown into some really unfair circumstances. So he's thrown into prison. And it's possible that the type of prison he was in was a large pit dug into the ground. Does that sound familiar? For honoring God, for doing the right thing, this was his reward. And almost a Job-like test of faith. Surely this is where we could understand Joseph just going, forget it. Instead, Joseph and we are reminded that the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. So now he's running the prison. 2 years later, Pharaoh summoned Joseph to interpret his recurring dream. The 7-year famine was coming, and they had 7 years to prepare for it. Suddenly, Joseph was elevated from prisoner to second in command. Another incredible turn of events. See, from that lower story perspective, it is a crazy roller coaster. But from the upper story perspective, the Lord had a plan and is sovereign. For 7 years, the Egyptians stored tons of food because the famine did come, and people came from everywhere to Egypt to purchase food, including all but one of his brothers. Just as he envisioned when he was 17 years old, the dream came true when his brothers bowed down before him. Granted, they didn't know who they were bowing down to except a very powerful leader in Egypt, but the imagery cannot be missed here. And when reading these chapters, we know that Joseph did not immediately reveal his identity. In fact, he really messed with his brothers and scared the heck out of them. He had every opportunity to pay them back and then some. We learn why he never did that during the emotional climax of the story when Joseph finally revealed himself to his brothers. Because somewhere along the way, Joseph caught a glimpse of God's upper story. See, he told them, God sent me before you to preserve life, a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. Afterwards, there's this complete family reunion with Jacob and all of his sons, and Joseph resettles them in a choice section of land. after their father's death and afraid that Joseph still might exact revenge on them after all that he's done for him, Joseph reassured them, "Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good, in order to preserve a numerous people as he is doing today. So have no fear." See, it's pretty amazing to see how Joseph was able to align his lower story with God's upper story. It allowed him to process all the adversities he endured and recognize that he had an important role in God's plan. The first fruit of his faithfulness was the grace shown to his brothers. This fruit is displayed in our lives when we trust and hold on to Paul's similar words in Romans 8:28. We know that all things work together for good for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. In war-torn Germany, Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote this at Christmas in the year 1942. "I believe that God can and will let good come out of everything, even the greatest evil. I believe that even our mistakes and shortcomings are not in vain, and that it is no more difficult for God to deal with them than with our supposedly good deeds." See, we all have a lot of manure we have to put up with in our lower stories. Some is obviously more hurtful and damaging than others, but no one gets through this life unscathed. Frazee writes, "No matter how painful some moments seem, your story is not over. If you love God and align your life to his upper story purposes, everything in your life, the ups and downs, the mountaintops and the valleys, the highs and the lows, the raises and the rejections, the good and bad, are all working together to accomplish good. Be patient. Trust God. Let him mold you during the difficult seasons to equip you for the assignment ahead." Genesis ends with some powerful foreshadowing from Joseph. He tells his brothers, "I'm about to die, but God will surely come to you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." Yes, God would bring them out of Egypt, but again, in ways no one could have ever imagined. That story is for next week. It's in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.